Hello, my sprightly art sluts. This is Allison Moon, and you are listening to Artgasm, the podcast all about the intersections of sex and art. I am so thrilled you are joining me on this stunning spring day. At least for me here in Portland, Oregon, spring has sprung and so many things are springing up right behind it. My backyard is a veritable orgy of avian and amphibian hormones. I have birds and frogs getting their freak on. I feel a little bit like a creep because I can't go outside of my deck without just seeing a bunch of animals just going at each other, which I guess is thematically relevant because today on this episode, I interview my partner of 12 years, Reid Mihalko, and we actually talk a lot about orgies because this episode was recorded in his New York apartment as we were preparing to leave it. And we're going to talk a lot about that, but it is a special double episode, and I'm really excited about that. And I'm giving you a double episode, which is kind of ironic considering my last episode, I was asking if these episodes were too long for you and you wanted me to shorten them. Well, this one is going to be twice as long, and there's a reason for that. I'm going to take a break. I've been recording and uploading this show every 2 weeks for a year now. My first episode aired last year, the very first week of April, and now we are approaching that very quickly. And so I'm going to take a little bit of a breather. I'm going to end season 1 with this episode, and then I will be back with season 2 probably sometime in midsummer. That's my goal. I'm taking this time off for a couple of different reasons. One is that I'm writing a musical. It's taking a lot of my creative energy, and I'm having a really good time with it. I don't know if it's ever going to see the light of day, but that's not the point of this project. This project is really a very personal one. It's helping me process a lot of stuff that I've been going through for the past couple of months. I'm so relieved to have that kind of artistic expression available to me. So I'm very excited to pour a little bit more time and attention into that. I also have this book that I'm writing, and the book is due at the beginning of August. And I just really want to spend a lot of time focusing on that. And then the third thing is that it's really just self-care. You're going to hear this a little bit in the episode that I recorded with Reid, but to be perfectly frank, last year was a really, really, really bad year. And it ended incredibly badly. I went through a lot at the end of 2018. And I'm certainly out of the thick of it. I'm feeling much better. I've done a lot of work and I've done a lot of exploration. And I'm really happy with where I've gotten to. But I still think I want to spend a little bit more time being a little bit more introspective and a little bit less verbally processy. So I'm going to take a little bit of time. And so I'm excited to deliver this episode to you. Before we get to that interview, though, just one little news piece and then one more little announcement. And the news piece is that Barbara Hammer died. And Barbara Hammer, it's hard to overstate her import and her importance in the arts in general, but specifically lesbian art. And she made some of the most important films to document the lesbian American experience. I could go into, I could do an entire episode on her work. And because this episode's already so long, I'm not going to do it. I'm just going to encourage you to go look her up if you're not familiar with her. She was seminal, formidable, all the words to describe. I mean, this podcast probably wouldn't exist without Barbara Hammer in a lot of different ways. And so it's important for me to acknowledge just her great influence on me, but also on queer women's work in general. So Barbara Hammer, rest in peace. You were a badass, and we appreciate the contributions you made to the world. And then for other announcements, hey, if you want to stay in touch with me while I'm on my break, you can do that in a couple of different ways. One, you can follow me on Instagram at Allison_Moon. You can follow me on Twitter at HeyAllieMoon. For workshops, I have a mailing list. I don't send stuff out very often on it. I probably should get better at that. But if you want to become a member of my mailing list, you can go to girlsex101.com. And when you sign up on the homepage there, you'll get the first couple chapters of Girl Sex 101 as a download, and then you'll be on my mailing list so that when I do teach workshops, when I come back into teaching, when I come back into the world, you'll hear about it. Now, for my Patreon subscribers, just to be clear, I'm going to keep on posting things on Patreon. I'm going to keep on posting stories and little news bits and things here and there because I want to keep the spirit of Artgasm going and I want to honor my commitment to you. So if you're interested in that too, obviously becoming a patron is the best way of doing that, which you can do it $1 a month all the way up to whatever you want to. But you can also follow me on Patreon without without having to give me any money. You won't be able to see things that are behind the paywall, obviously, but you will still at least get to see new posts as they come up. And sometimes I may post, free stuff just kind of generally. So I have no guarantees there, but that's an option as well. So that's a great way to stay in touch with me while I'm taking a little break from recording this podcast. So speaking of staying in touch, I will be making 2 live appearances in the month of April. The first is going to be in Las Vegas at Klexicon, which is a con for fans who are also interested in or are queer women. So there's going to be a lot of actors from your favorite shows and a lot of writers and comic book artists and all sorts of fun things. And there's going to be me. I'm going to be moderating a panel on censorship on the internet of sex positive work. So we're going to talk about the Tumblr porn ban. We're going to talk about Sesta and Fosta and how those have screwed things up for a lot of people. I'm going to be on the panel with Sunny Megatron and Isabel Dressler, both of whom are artists and creators who use the internet, obviously, to sell and share their work and how things have gotten complicated. So if you're going to be at Klexicon, please do find me. I will not be tabling, but I will have books. So if you want to buy a signed copy of Girl Sex 101 or Bad Dyke from me, you can do that by just finding me. My panel is going to be on Sunday morning, which I believe is April 14th. But yeah, I'm going to be there April 11th through the 15th in Las Vegas. So hit me up. And then the following weekend, I'm going to be in Seattle at a thing called Journey 19, which is a gathering and kind of a retreat of sorts for creators of all kinds, entrepreneurs, artists, community leaders. It's April 19th through the 21st in Seattle. And I love this group. The group is called Worth the Journey. Really amazing human beings run this organization, and what I love about it is that they are community centered first. This isn't like how to just, market your work. This is about how to build connections and community and find your purpose amongst other people who are what one might call heart centered. And I really appreciate that. And I appreciate the people that they bring to this thing. So it's a really cool event. I'm super excited to be included. I'm going to be talking about how to build a book, basically from outlining through writing, through proposals, through marketing. It's going to be a really far-flung conversation for people who are really invested in trying to figure out how to get their words out to readers in new ways. So if you're curious about that, I would recommend going to worththejourney.com and then click on events and you'll see Journey 19. It's going to be a really special weekend and I'm super excited to be there for all of it. Not just my own session, but I'm actually going to be an enthusiastic participant. So I'm very excited for that as well. So those are 2 places you can catch me in real life. And again, if you want to pay attention to other events as they come up in the spring and into the summer, you can do so by going to Twitter and following me at HeyAllieMoon or just signing up for my mailing list at girlsex101.com. Okay, so yeah, let me introduce my partner, Reid Mihalko. So I'm so happy that he and I sat down to record this episode. We went to New York in November of last year to close out this apartment that he had lived in for nearly 25 years. And it was a very emotional experience for both of us. We had already gone through a lot this year, and then losing his apartment, leaving his apartment just added another layer of loss and complexity to it already very complex here. What I appreciate about this is how vulnerable he is, but I also really love the fact that we are able to talk in, it's a really fun conversation for me because it is very far-flung, and we talk about our philosophies on sex and kink, our personal preferences and our desires and the way we think about pornography and the way we fantasize. And that's really fun. I think it's fun to talk about that with loved ones. I think it's cool to get to hear your lovers' perspectives on their bodies. So I really enjoy that aspect of it. But we also do talk about the origin of Cuddle Party, which Reid Mihalko founded 15 years ago. And we talk about massage parties and we talk about him throwing orgies and how he basically learned a lot about his sexuality by throwing orgies. And so there's a little bit of talk about New York. There's a little bit of talk about sexual self-identity. There's a lot of good stuff in here. And of course, I love him. And I really enjoyed having this conversation with him. At the top of the episode, he mentions that he was in an accountability process this past year, a formal accountability process this past year. We don't really talk about it. We touch on it a little bit late in the interview. But if you're curious about that, the best thing you can do is go to readaboutsex.com. It's REID, aboutsex.com. reidmihalko.com, and you can learn about his accountability process there because it's linked. There's a lot of posts. There's a lot of text. It was a really big deal for those of us who are involved in it. So I encourage you, if you're curious about this, if this is particularly true, if you're going through anything in a community around people needing to be held to account for past actions or things that they've said or done, or if you're just kind of trying to figure out how restorative justice or any sort of non-carceral system around justice works, there's good stuff there. It's not definitive by any means. It's just one guy's exploration of the stuff that he took on in order to try and become a better person for his community. So it's limited in scope in that way. It's not about being an expert. It's about being a decent human being. But if you're curious about that, I recommend you check it out because it's interesting and it's confusing to a lot of people. And at the same time, I think there's a lot of value in seeing how people navigate this very complex time in which we are able to speak publicly about things that have harmed us and how we want people to show up better for us. That's interesting. That's all I got to say about that. All right. So without further ado, please enjoy my special extra long bonus double episode with my beloved Reid Mihalko.
Hello, my love.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm on your podcast.
I know, it's exciting.
I'm nervous.
Why?
Because I've had quite an interesting year.
Yeah.
And we are sitting in my New York apartment, soon to not be my New York apartment. Mm-hmm. And these are the last few days that I will be in this apartment, probably ever again.
Yeah. Unless you seduce the person who moves in.
That's possible. And yeah, so I've had this lease in New York City on East 70th Street between 1st and 2nd Avenue we were doing the math today, I think 24 years.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. And I'm sad.
Yeah. That's fair.
And you had a really good idea for a podcast, and I said yes.
Yeah, so I wanted to talk to you because, as you know, I have strong feelings about place and the sensuality of place. And I don't think there are many places on this planet that I have more of a strong sensuous connection to than
this apartment. Where we fell in love.
Yeah, well.
Part of it, kind of.
I fell in love with parts of you?
No, with the apartment. Let's be honest. Our relationship is solely based on this apartment, and maybe now that I will surrender the lease, you will leave me finally.
You know what? I think that would be real weird, considering we haven't lived here for years.
Well, I don't know. And I also just want to say, I have also had a tough year because of an accountability, restorative justice process that turned into an accountability process. So this is also the end of almost a year of that. Mm-hmm. And it's just very interesting for me to have all of these things happening.
Yeah.
This year, which is also my 50th year of being alive that we know of, unless I've somehow blocked out that I'm immortal or some weirdness. But yeah, it's just so interesting. And I appreciate you wanting to talk about place. Because I'm also in a meta way, I'm in a place in my life and all these things are happening at the same time. Mm-hmm. As they do in life.
Yeah, well, I think that places get imbued with energy in certain ways, not to be too woo about it, but I do feel like there's resonances that place can pick up. I think that the more, natural materials a place is made out of, the more that happens. And this place is brick and wood. And I couldn't imagine it's having the same vibration if it were all drywall and concrete and steel, Mm-hmm. So, yeah.
My immediate response to that is I'm curious about how a skyscraper will feel in, 80 years. Mm. Because this apartment... I don't know, do you want to describe this apartment?
I think you should describe it.
So when I moved into this apartment in, we think, 1994, the rent, my aunt, who has now passed away, Aunt Lynn, if you're listening, she helped me find this apartment. We walked in, it was the 5th floor walk up in the back of the building. And she walked in, 30 seconds, she turned to me. She goes, take it. She turned to the realtor and said, he'll take it. And I'm like, wait, what? And the rent was $700 a month. And I was like, there's no way I can afford this. And she looked at me. She's like, you can afford it.
You were
take it.
An actor and
I hadn't started acting yet. I was just a bartender.
You were just a bartender. Okay. Bartender in New York, though.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, was $750 that hard to make as a bartender in New York?
So, I mean, this is also back in the days where, the movie Cocktail made it seem like, every bartender was on top of the world.
The most glamorous job in New York City.
Well, yeah, and it was also the early 90s, mid-90s almost, which meant it wasn't the late 80s.
Right.
When, as a bartender, hanging out with old-time bartenders here in the city, there were, the money was made at the end of the 80s. You could still make good money if you worked at the right place. In the 90s, is kind of true for, lots of places if you work at the right place, even today. But I was not pulling in the kind of money that legends were made of.
Sure. When
people talked about, and granted, these were old-time bartenders who were 5 a.m, drunk off their asses, talking about the good old days, on the Upper East Side. Again, so like now, me with all the nerdery that I have, you can't divorce those conversations from classism and location and even being on Manhattan and being a bartender in Manhattan. Well, what all these things mean. So
right. Well, I think that what's odd at least to me, thinking about that is being from the Midwest. Bartending is a service job, and service jobs are blue-collar jobs. And so the idea of a on-top-of-the-world bartender is the kind of thing that can only happen in a city that is just oozing money. And the people in the service industry are catching it as it falls, as it rains down on their heads from Wall Street pockets, So to me, it's like, I think like LA and New York are the only two cities in America where being a bartender does feel like a classy potential position, or being a waitress at a really fancy restaurant where you're pulling or club, where you're pulling in thousands of bucks a night. It's a very strange class conversation, right? Because you are still in service to people with God knows far more money than you do, but you can still do just fine,
Yeah, I mean, it's the idea, it's not even the art of bartending, but it's a service job. Location, as the joke goes, is so important. And then there's place in the timeline of history is important. I mean, I think looking back, the most I ever made in one bartending shift, I think, was $750 cash, but that was on New Year's. At a very, at an amazing bar, Merc Bar, for those people who'd ever been to Merc Bar, which was in Soho.
And no longer exists.
Yeah. Whereas you talk to old-timers, and by old-timers I mean people who were working in the late 80s in Manhattan or out in the Hamptons, places where people were making a lot of money bartending and waitressing. $750 was like, oh my God, we did that on a Tuesday, Right. But it's just so interesting because I never could have afforded to live in Manhattan if I wasn't a bartender. And nowadays, when I talk to bartenders and service workers, I don't know how you can live in Manhattan just being a bartender these days. So and I've also been out of bartending for so long, and not lived in Manhattan for so long. I also worry that I just don't have a realistic view of anything anymore. Yeah. Nostalgia, looking back on something, I think just warps it all.
Well, that's what I was thinking about with this apartment that we're sitting in right now, because we had the party last night and we had a bunch of people who had been friends of yours for years in New York and came to parties here and were having memories.
Yeah, you got cuddle parties. or orgies or just gatherings.
Right. But there were a couple of people who were new. Mm-hmm. And so we were like talking about, we're giving up this amazing apartment, this glorious apartment, this extraordinary deal on the Upper East Side. And I was kind of seeing it through their eyes, where it's like, to me, this place is magical because I've had so many experiences here that are magical. Whereas if I were to walk in for the first time, I think there's that weird gas smell and the tiles are falling off the floor and there's cracks in the bricks and
It's called character.
yeah, but it's grungy, you know? But it's our grungy. And so there's a level at which I'm like, oh, that's so funny that I'm like thinking about, oh God, like how could we possibly give up this magical place? And I'm sure there are other people who are like, I only pay like $200 more a month for a place in Brooklyn that's like real nice, you know?
Well, and again, like growing up, like I never thought I would ever live in Manhattan. I vowed back in college I would never live here.
Really? Why?
I grew up in New Hampshire in on a lake.
Yeah, but your mom's a New Yorker and
my mom was born in Brooklyn and spent her teenage years in Connecticut. Like that does not necessarily, I mean, again, no disrespect. I know if you were born in Brooklyn, you are a Brooklynite forever. And my mom didn't quite have that, like, you know, yo, I'm from Brooklyn kind of thing, right? Because she didn't quite, she remembered a little bit of her childhood there, right? So again, like that's a whole other interesting conversation of how do you bond with places and,
well, it's interesting
and your
too,
own identity.
Like your immediate family is very country mouse, but your cousins are all New Yorkers. I mean, your extended family are city mice. Mm-hmm. And so that's an interesting dynamic.
Yeah, and they're, but then again, like growing up in Manhattan, they're Upper East Side city mice, which is very different than Lower East Side city mice, or even West East Side, West Side mice. Like, oh my God. Yeah, you know, and I got a job because of my aunt and uncle. Thank you, Uncle Walter and Aunt Lynn. Like, when I moved here, it was because when I was done with college, and I started bartending and bar backing and bartending in college. And thank you, Bob, for getting me a job. You know, working as a security at a bar, which then led to me eventually getting a bar backing job. Like all these really interesting things that you just can't thread. You can't know at the time how things interweave.
Yeah.
But then I moved to New York because when I got done with college, I needed to leave Rhode Island. I knew that. And I was an illustrator. I went to art school. And I wanted to, you know, I loved doing comic book art. So, and then I thought I maybe wanted to do acting and be like the next Chuck Norris because of martial arts and stuff. And I was like, well, so that's either LA or New York. I had friends from acting at Brown who lived here, and my aunt and uncle lived here.
Yeah.
So they were like, well, come down here and stay for a while and see if you like it. And the only time I'd been in Manhattan before was for 2 weeks for an internship with Marvel Comics over winter break.
R.I.P. Stanley.
Yeah. R.I.P. Stanley. But like, so that was my first taste of Manhattan.
Yeah.
And that was so whirlwind, and I was still so young. I didn't quite, like, New York never sunk in because I was either at Marvel Comics or at my Aunt Lynn's place because I was broke.
Yeah.
So then moving here to maybe pursue acting, they're the ones who hooked me up with a job at their favorite watering hole, which was the Mad Hatter, which is now not there anymore.
Where is that?
It was on 76 and between 76 and 77th on 2nd Avenue.
Wasn't that an old like?
It was an Irish pub, like back where.
Didn't they have IRA meetings?
Yeah, they had IRA meetings in the basement. Like there was so much history there, and I met so many like old timers.
That's something that makes me really happy when you describe this apartment too. Is, you know, the oldness of things and these stories. The more you talk to people who live in New York, the more, you know, especially if they've renovated their places or something and they discover these old things. And so you talked about when you moved in here, it was all just drywall and low ceilings, and you discovered the surfaces that were hidden. And that to me just feels like one of those very like magical, like that can only happen in a city that's hundreds of years old, you know?
And so for people who are like, wow, like this is very neat, like old, New York kind of stuff. I will tell you there's a book called Winter's Tale by Mark Helprin that talks about New York at, the late 1890s to turn of the century, 1900s, that talks about some of the architecture and building materials and things like that in a super romantic fairy tale way. It's a great book. I love it. I recommend it.
That reminds me, so I was talking to Brendan J. Sullivan on an episode of Artgasm for just Patreon. So I talked to him twice, and one was talking about his career as a DJ and a writer, and the other one was talking about one of his favorite books, which is, oh my God, Ernest Hemingway's A Movable Feast. And I read it in preparation for the interview, and I remember, because again, like I think when we think about historic periods in major cities, it's impossible not to think romantically about them, right? Especially like New York, Paris, London. But what I loved about reading A Movable Feast was it's Hemingway in Paris, his salad days and being a struggling writer and sleeping with women and meeting artists and having all the things that from a distance feel very romantic. But he had this one description that I loved so much where he was talking about whether or not to spend a couple francs that he had gotten on wood for the stove so they could have heat that night. And so he decides to buy some kindling, and he's looking up to all these chimneys and to see them, whether or not people are burning fires or not. And he talks about like just how filthy the air was, how filthy the apartment would be when they started burning things. So you have to basically trade the comforts of your lungs for the comforts of your skin. And I remember that being he didn't say it in such a way, but I remember that being such an evocative thing where it's like, we think of these things as so romantic, but at the same time, they were freezing their asses off and they were broke, and fire is sexy and it's also dirty, and when you start to think about how we kind of erase the filth of things, the very Hollywood sanitized version of, Victorian London or, turn of the century Paris.
Nothing like a nice case of tuberculosis to fix everything,
right,
make it a little less romantic.
Even more recently, we talk about like the CBGB days of New York City, or like the gritty days when nobody wanted to live in New York because it was dangerous and filthy, and the graffiti on the subways, and it was a dangerous place to be.
Yeah. And I have friends who are old enough to remember those days who still live here who romanticize it.
Right, even though they would bitch and moan about it then. Yeah. I think that's such a fascinating thing too, this like hindsight not really being 20/20, but the actual rose-colored version of these things. Where it's like,
I wonder too around the seediness, where seedy merges with or mixes with illicitness, and how sanitized means not illicit.
Yeah.
I have, friends of mine who loved Times Square in the 70s because of the peep shows.
Sure.
And, the glory holes in things. And they miss those days.
Sure.
And hated how, Bloomberg sanitized New York. And even the sanitization, and this is again where I feel like I'm outclassed by not being able to talk articulately around class, but like gentrification and sanitization and, the removal of the underground or the illicit.
Well, yeah, so
sex culture.
I think that what you're hinting at, which I think is really important, is when we talk about gentrification, we often talk about so like the gentry will move in, and that itself is not necessarily a problem. A person moving into a place that they can afford and fixing it up for them, that's not by itself a problem often. What the problem is that they start to impose their standards of living on everyone else. And so if they feel uncomfortable with a sex club around the corner or a leather bar or, hookers working, if they feel uncomfortable, they're going to do what they can to remove those elements, and their sphere of influence gets bigger and bigger. And then as they increase their sphere of influence and start cleaning up, quote unquote, their little block, then more people move into that block who have the same values, and then people who have different subcultures start getting squeezed out, because the reason why those clubs existed is because they weren't allowed to be anywhere else. The reason why the women working those corners was because they couldn't work anywhere else. And so when you start to say, like, it's a squeezing factor, it's a pushing out of gentrification. It's not a cleaning up. It's a getting something that you don't like further and further outside of your sphere. And that's where it becomes real hurt, because it's not that these people stop existing. It's not that these people just decide to give up their hobbies, the people who you're squeezing out. It's that these people have fewer and fewer places to go.
Yeah, and again, back to like bartending and things like that. Like even when I was acting, bartending and working the door at Merc Bar, and then in a couple of other places, like that's how I made ends meet in between acting gigs.
Yeah.
And the Meatpacking district, there was a restaurant, a very fancy restaurant called Frezen, that it's no longer there. I'm pretty sure it's not there anymore. But just like before the Meatpacking district really flipped, and the hotels moved in, I would work the door, and it was right in the heart of the Meatpacking district when they were still packing meat, in all the ways that means. And there was a night where limo pulls up, and not Ivanka Trump, but who was Trump's wife before that?
Well,
was it Ivana? There was like,
yeah,
or
like
like
Lonnie Anderson.
No, not Lonnie Anderson, but basically before the first lady currently.
Oh, yeah,
like
so
his past
Ivana,
wife.
Yeah.
And she gets out of the limo, and dressed to the nines, while this amazing drag queen, also dressed to the nines, walks by, and they cross paths, and the drag queen is like, you're looking fabulous, Ivana, and she's like, you're looking fabulous, darling, and they just cross paths, both going in different directions, and Ivana walks into, I hold the door and walks into Fresno, and I'm like, only in New York, on cobblestone streets, with pig's blood, underneath the tires of the limo, right? So that grittiness, it was just so many things happening all at once, and like that was something I never experienced or found in New Hampshire growing up, or in Rhode Island.
Well, I mean, that's speaking to city. So again, like I think kind of going back to what's happening right now with this kind of race to the middle or race to the vanilla, like I remember hearing that being a big conversation around just kind of queer rights. Like I went to the Millennium March in DC in 2000, which was this big gay rights march, and it was essentially pride, but it was more of an activist march. And so there was a rally and talking about equality, and this was of course before legalized marriage equality. And I remember it being like they were getting some flyers handed out, and it was a bunch of like radicals saying like we need to stop the HRC, the Human Rights Campaign, and this kind of race to sanitize queer culture. Because in some ways, and this is, as a tactic, mainstreaming things helps you be seen as equals by the people who hold the power. So a lot of gay men, white wealthy gay men, were trying to further queer rights by hobnobbing with the knobs, right? Basically, the argument was, we're just like you. We're just like you. We want just what you do. We want to get married and have babies and live in a townhouse and in DuPont Circle. Like, we want the same things you do. Whereas a bunch of people are like, actually, no, we don't. We want our leather clubs in the basement of the Meatpacking district. We want our blood play in the Chelsea Hotel. We don't want what you think we want, and we don't want what you think we should want. We are different from you, and we love that about ourselves. And I think that that's a huge point of tension even now in understanding queer rights and understanding cities. This idea that like, wow, everybody wants a Sweet Greens on the corner, It's like, well, no, some of us would prefer if CBGB's was still there.
Yeah, or the peep show with the glory holes.
Exactly.
So wait, so now this is part of one of the many reasons that I love you. Like this is kind of like what we talk about around the dinner table and things like that.
This is not that rare for our
So with Harvey
conversations.
Milk then around the genius of the more of us that come out, and everybody has a right to stay in the closet too. I'm not saying everybody needs to come out, but the privilege of if you can come out so that more people know that we are here.
Right.
How's that the same or different from what you're saying?
I think I think there's a little bit of resonance there, but I think it's different. I think that knowing that, yes, we are quote unquote normal people, like we are your school teachers, we are your firefighters, we are your cops. I think it was important at a time when queers were seen as very freaky deaky and perverts and deviants and criminals, right? So it was important for people to see your neighbors, your teachers, your doctors, we're queer. I think now the conversation is not about how we should all have to want the same things and we should all live the same way. I think the conversation is like we should be able to, you see a lot in trans rights, trans people should be able to access healthcare to transition if they want to. They should also have the right to not have to in order to be taken seriously as a trans person. And there's no one way to be trans. There's no one way to be queer. There's no one way to be sexual. There's no one way to be in a happy marriage. Understanding the true diversity of the human experience is ultimately, I think, what LGBT rights are trying to get to. It's a lot harder of a sell because it's a lot harder for people to grok the granularity of the human experience. You know, if people can all say, hey, we all want to be able to get married because we all want to be monogamous and have babies, that's one thing. Because it's like, okay, great. Like, we should let these people get married. But it's a different thing to say, hey, actually, I'm in a polycule with 8 people of varying genders. Some of us have foster kids. Some of us are adopting. Some of us aren't interested in having children. Like that. And then that's one family unit. And the other family unit is over here, like 2 men with a surrogate daughter, like everybody's granularity. It's harder for people to understand like how equal rights affect that, right? How can that happen when you want a completely different situation than I do? I think that this reminds me of when I was working at the LGBT Center in Cleveland, and I was in their little pool of like go out to church groups and talk to people about being gay, and I remember I was in the kind of training process at one point. I was probably like 19 at the time. And they were like, so you just want to talk about like being a lesbian? She was like, so you talk about being a lesbian and how you discovered you were a lesbian? And I'm like, I'm sorry, I have to pause. I'm not a lesbian. I'm bisexual. And the woman got real quiet and she's like, that's going to be a little harder. Because most people can understand, oh, they're just like me, but they just like the opposite, right? I like men, she likes women. It's just the same but inverted, right? She's just like maybe a man because she likes women. Yeah. It's much more complicated when you actually like people regardless of their gender because it's harder for straight people to grok that. Sure. And I remember that being so confusing to me because I think bisexuality is like the easiest thing on the planet to understand.
Just all of the above.
Yeah, because like you're just attracted to people, not gender. Yeah.
But if people can't relate, it's hard for them to understand. If they can't understand, it's easy for them to fear.
Exactly. And so when we talk about like polyamory being this new thing that people are trying to get work around, or different kinds of family structures in general, different kinds of sexualities in general, like oh okay, so like I mean you hear this all the time with sex too, like how do gay men have sex? Well, okay, they use their butts, so it's like oh they have anal sex, great. It's just like having vaginal sex. Holes. Yeah. Sex is about penis penetrating hole, whereas you can have like, and then it becomes like, but how do lesbians have sex if there's no penis? How does sex even happen? Right? It's this impossibility of understanding because you're going to use your own framework as a way to understand somebody else's experience. Whereas if your experience of sex is all about your penis, well then how the heck can sex happen without a penis? Or much even more confusing, how is kink sexually gratifying if your genitals aren't involved? Yeah. How can being called a worm and licking somebody's boots turn you on? How is that considered legitimate sexuality when I have no desire to lick boots and be called a worm?
And that's where things become so reduced by, air quotes, popular culture and to keep it simple. But when you start becoming more literate around nuance, then all of a sudden kink without genital interaction makes sense because it's about power dynamics. It's about what turns your brain on. Right. It's about sensation play. And there's all kinds of sensations and diversities of things that people can be into and turned on by or feel good that doesn't have to be just about penis into a hole, perhaps for procreation.
But if we're trying to, yes, all of that. But if we're trying to expand the minds of the people who are controlling our lives with vice laws and such, it's a much harder sell to say, like, well, yeah, like power dynamics and turned on by inversion of dynamics. And like, because they're thinking about, well, I just like to go home and bang my wife for 4 minutes. And that's sex.
4 minutes is twice the national average.
Yeah, which is, well, that guy probably thinks he's a stud. So I think that's the issue ultimately behind everything, is that like we're kowtowing to people who are holding power.
Yeah, and this is where with what you said, like if we try to reduce if we're trying to connect with them and somehow connect in a way where we can then say, like, look, we are human, but we have to simplify it and reduce it. Yeah. Then it ultimately it doesn't serve a purpose, but at the same time, like, to try to give them all the complexity and blow people's minds, that's really hard too.
Yeah, and I think for me there becomes a part of where it's just like when I'm in educator mode, like my job, it is truly my job, is to try and find those inroads and to be like, okay, so like, you know how you really like pumping at your wife for 4 minutes? Well, like, is it like, do you like that when she's below you? Does it make you feel like she's giving herself to you? Like, and now it's like, okay, now we can talk about power dynamics in a small way. Or do you really like it when she just takes you and just throws you on the bed and just climbs on top of your cock? Like, because then this hypothetical person might think, oh yeah, it's really nice to just relax and have somebody take their pleasure from me. Great. Now you're starting to understand how some people run their entire sex lives or run their social lives.
Yeah, you
right?
give them those little feet in the door moments.
Right, which is, I think, really useful. And, I mean, kind of like, oh gosh, so this is an interesting anecdote. I don't know if it's going to tie well together, but kind of tying it a little bit back to New York and a little bit to city life. I remember having a conversation with my mother once. My sister had read one of my mom's Marie Claire magazines, and my sister was probably 12. And
Scandalous.
I was probably 10. Yeah, I mean, like,
just leaving Marie Claire lying about the house.
I mean, not to be cheeky, but like a lot of those magazines did have some adult things in them, right? Not even like Cosmo, but like actually just like they would have true to life stories. They would have stories that women would share. And this one story that this woman, it was an essay. It was a woman who had this perfect marriage, perfect life. And she had discovered that her husband had been sleeping with prostitutes on like a very regular basis, like went into debt to open new credit cards. Like he had a problem. And the story, told from this woman's perspective, my sister went to my mom and said, Mom, I don't understand why a man who's married would see a prostitute. Because in her mind, he's already getting sex. Why would she need that? And
so wait, just kudos to your mom for having a relationship with at least your sister, but you too, where you felt as daughters that you could go ask questions to your mom.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, my mom's great. And that one's
for you, Betty.
That was great. And so I remember my mom kind of had a moment where she's like, how do I even begin? I could see it on her face. Yeah. And 10-year-old me kind of just like blinked twice, and I looked at my sister and I said, well, because some men like it dirty. Now, as a 37-year-old, I apologize to the sex workers in my life for saying that as a 10-year-old, because that is not necessarily the case, and
we might cut you some slack.
There's no value judgments now assigned to that, but as a 10-year-old, that made sense to me. And I would probably say nowadays, like, some men like strange, right? Like some people want something different. And
different can also be like people who are experts or well versed in things that your wife might not be into.
Yeah, or you feel like you can ask a person who is a professional sex worker for things that you could never ask your wife for because you're afraid of being shamed or humiliated, or because you just don't think she'll be a yes for it, or because it's more exciting to do it from somebody who has very clean boundaries. So again, whatever the reason is now as an adult, I can look back on. And my mom was just horrified. But I think that there is a level of the sanitization piece of like, if we could go to a sex club, if there were leather clubs on every corner like a Starbucks, and they were well lit, and they had a staff of people who were cleaning up the spooge and welcomed you in and took your name and told you when your room was ready. I don't know.
Basically, like if leather bars were like Equinoxes here in New York.
Yeah, exactly. If orgies were like cocktail parties, if BDSM dungeons were like Equinox gyms, would people use them in the same way? Would we be like, oh, you know what? I'll meet you at dinner at 9. I gotta swing by the dungeon and get flogged real quick. Just got to get in my 30 minutes, right?
Awesome.
But would it? And this is where I'm kind of finding myself.
Because then it would be popular. Like it
Right.
would be not pop culture like cheeky, but
Right.
it would be normalized.
The point is the taboo, I guess is what I'm saying.
So if something became normalized, can it be taboo then?
Right. So this makes me remember. So a friend of mine who's a porn star. We got into a conversation about porn that we both like, and I was talking about how I can't really watch porn that's like, queer happy people, because like that's my life. Like people with non-normative gender identities and people who are into like strap-ons and slapping people around. Like that's just my life.
Allison, that you watch straight porn and you haven't been telling me?
Yeah, I have watched straight porn in the past. Don't judge me. But what I find, but anyway, and so I was talking about this, and then this friend of mine was saying, oh, like I can, like as a porn star, I can't watch, the only porn that gets me off is porn in which I'm not quite sure if it's been ethically made. Because taboo is the sexy. So if it looks like the performers are a little strung out, if it looks like maybe the director was coercing people into things, that's the stuff that gets their juices flowing.
Yeah.
Which is really hard to say publicly, and this is why this is a private conversation that I'm now sharing. But like, that's because the taboo is the point.
It's the hot, like HAWT. Like that's hot. That turns me on. I don't know why I said I don't like Valley
sound like
Girl.
Bodhi.
You're going down, Bodhi. People trusted you and they died. I missed you by 2 weeks. It's where it was, San Cabo Lucas or whatever. But I knew you wouldn't miss the 300-year storm, Bodhi. Thank you.
That was an extra little bit of lines.
Keanu, if you're listening, you know where to find me. Through Allison. So my question is how would you describe or talk about hot in that turns me on because that looks so yummy and nice versus your friend, which is I need to not know if it's ethical because that's the turn on. Like the arousal of the non-illicit versus the arousal of the illicit, because it swings back to my thinking of like, if you normalize things, does normalizing mean it becomes sanitized no matter what?
So that's an interesting question. So I guess, I mean, if you're asking about my personal experience of like porn or turn on, okay, so
just like for you.
Yeah, so I think, to try and project into what my friend was talking about, it's because they're on porn sets all the time. And so it's all Hollywood, right? It's all like that girl's squirting orgasm or that man's like massive ejaculation, like, the cinemagic that goes behind those things. And so they don't have the same kind of sensual resonance like she's coming so hard because she's so excited. It's like, actually, no, she probably drank a bunch of water, so it's mostly pee that she's gushing out because that looks better on camera, that kind of stuff, right? So it's kind of like watching a maybe bad fight choreography. It's hard for you to enjoy the movie because you're too busy noticing how that guy's fist didn't actually connect with that face, right?
Huh. This is interesting. Those of you listening may not know this, but I used to do stunt and fight choreography stuff for low-budget films. If you'd like to check out my work, please check out All Night Bodega, available on Amazon.
Wait, so you choreographed the fights for All Night Bodega?
I did gun safety, one of the gun shoot scenes, and a little bit of the fight choreography for a couple of the things. There's a big fight scene that was choreographed by somebody else. But what's interesting for me is when I watch fight scenes, I'm looking at it from like, I know it's not a real fight, but does it look like a real fight?
Yeah. And
are the actors acting like their characters? Are their characters being true to themselves through the way they fight? Like, it's like in the fight choreography world, there's like the nerding out of like, well, we're choreographing this fight for Macbeth, but would Macbeth really fight like that? Like you're trying to create fights for the character to have the character's arc through how they fight.
Yes,
right?
Like fight scenes, like sex scenes, which I've just talked about recently, have to develop character or further plot. Hopefully both. But yeah, you want fight choreography that reflects the strengths and weaknesses of your characters, both physically and also hopefully psychically, right? And that's hugely important. And when you see a lazy fight scene, it's usually that everybody knows karate now, or everybody, was in the military now. And so everybody's got the same training because that's what the fight choreographer had. And that's what they know how to do.
Yeah.
And you're not actually taking into account various body types, height differentials, strength differentials.
This is fun because it feels like I get to drop all these New York names.
Yeah.
Rick Sordeley, who trained me for fight choreography stuff back in the day as an actor. One of his things, being a theater nerd, is one, you have to make the fight scene safe, especially in theater, where a performer can do them, multiple shows a week and for multiple months and not get harmed. But he's a big nerd around like sword fighting and different kinds of sword fighting and eras, and we can't do these moves because these moves weren't really in popular use in the time that this play is being enacted and things like that. So bringing this all back around is the authenticity when we're with porn too, right? Like there's the feat of like, oh my God, like that's just amazing that your body can do that. But then for me, it's the, are you in the moment? Like, are you connecting? And, as a sex nerd, there are moments where you're not really connecting, but you're just trying to pull off the position. And everyone's on board with the thing is a little tricky and the couch is the wrong height. And, we're not really having a moment, but wouldn't it be cool if we can get this many penises, or hands into this, thing? Like, let's see if we can make it happen. Yeah. But then those magic moments where you're getting to pull off things that maybe you haven't done before, and you're connected. Yeah. Which, having talked to musicians, is like those magic moments where not only are you connecting with your band, and you're connecting with the music, and the music's moving through you, but the audience is surfing the same wave.
Well, yeah, I feel like you're talking about sexuality from, the multiple levels, and I think that's kind of keep answering your question about porn or the turn on. Like, I think you've talked about this a little bit in your classes, where people can kind of relate to the erotic or the sensual, right? And can you describe the difference real quick?
Yeah, and again, like I think Jack Moran might have started this idea in his book about the erotic mind. And maybe I heard this from Carol Queen or Nina Hartley, but the idea of, so I'm apologizing basically in advance if I misattribute this. It's the idea that what's erotic is what turns your brain on, and then the way that I teach it is what's sensual is the sensations that turns your body on. Yeah. Generally speaking, this particular sensation in this stage of me being aroused increases the arousal. Right. And these kinds of thoughts or ideas or images at this place in me being turned on, it tends to increase the turn on.
Right. So that's what I want to talk about in terms of how it relates to theme. So with my friend who's turned on by the idea of the taboo and the strung out performers maybe not being fully on board, whereas I'm more of a, like, if I see something in porn that I can feel in my body, that turns me on, right? Before I got my breast reduction, for instance, breast stuff really turned me on because my breasts were so innervated. They were so alive. So I watched a person touch somebody's breast and I could feel it in my body.
Got it. Like mirror neuron kind of thing?
Yeah, very much mirror neurons. Yeah. And I think some people can be dominant in one or the other. They're either they get to access their turn on by the thought, or they access their turn on by the sensation. And I am definitely a sensation person. So for me, like an environment that feels like a lover in terms of touch, like a place that physically feels good, where I can touch the surface of the walls, or the bedding feels particularly sensuous, I can drop right into a place. And then that also applies to smell. Like, if something can get inside of me, something can get inside of me, right? And so I'm very turned on by somebody's smell. If I put my face in their neck, I know whether or not I'm ready for them or not, right? I know whether or not we have chemistry. And so this is when I'm really turned on by somebody. They can just touch my arm and I can have an orgasm, right? Because I can get so turned on by touch, by sensation. And so for me, venue of sex is about the sensualness of it, the smell of it, the feel of it, sometimes the taste of it. And this is where, like, fabrics can be really nice, like leather can be really nice too, or satin or something like that. Whereas I think I would hazard a guess, for some people who enjoy venues that feel seedier, for instance, or very high class, right? If you go to an orgy at the top of some sort of fabulous penthouse, not because that penthouse smells good, but because that penthouse makes you think of opulence and wealth and dripping with class. So that's
turning your brain on.
You're turned on in your brain.
And
that's how you access your body.
The seediness is the erotic turn on because of the illicitness or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, so, like, let's think of the Leather Club in Hell's Kitchen now, right? Or in the Meatpacking District. So now we think of, like, the basement.
The Leather Club that used to be there, because I don't know if there are any left.
I was using a hypothetical example, but yes. So there were many there at the time. So, but I've never been to any of them. So I'm just gonna make up one in my head, right? So it's a basement. It's underneath a butcher shop.
The Hellfire Club.
It smells like blood and cum, and it's all aggressive men just tearing at each other, right? So for the person who is excited by that space, it might be that I have to go to this nasty neighborhood and I have to be a tough guy in order to protect myself. And so I'm going to get into the headspace of now I'm a tough guy and I'm going to meet other tough guys and they're going to, maybe they're going to have their way with me, and oh no, like maybe I'm not strong enough to fight them off, right? All of this erotic mind on the way to the club. And then when you're in the club, it smells like blood and it smells like cum, and you hear all these aggressive men being mean to each other and, whatever. So it might be that illicitness is how you get into that space. For some people, it might be that it smells like man. And the smell of the men is what gets you excited. And it might be walking through a very sweaty space where you feel the air on your skin, and you have to walk next to men who are dressed in rubber and leather. And as you walk by them, your skin is grazing their gear. And that's exciting. And that might be the sensual way in which space matters. And it's entirely possible for many of us that it's a mix of both, right?
Yeah. Well, and then also when you add in, like, ideas of, like, turn on and how fear and turn on can be very similar.
Right. Yep.
Nervous system wise, right? So, like, if you're going to the seedy place where you feel like you're in danger, or even, like, for some of my friends, like, truck stop sex is exciting for them, but they don't know if they're going to get the shit kicked out of them.
Yeah, or killed.
Right?
Yeah.
So but the adrenaline of taking those risks, right? Like, it's, I mean, it's like, what's the word? extreme sports,
Right.
Like extreme sexual, this week
Right.
on extreme cruising.
Right, and that's the thing. We have friends who are into creating scenes,
Mm-hmm.
right? And for them, the whole point is like, and I'm gonna wear this, and then you're gonna wear this, and at some point in this evening, when we're at this place, somebody's gonna come over, and they're gonna say, "Hey, you can't do that," and then they're gonna be like, "Oh, what?" And then they have this whole script that they write, and they get to the place where the sex happens, but all of that set dressing, all of that scene design, all of that script writing is to get them into a space where they can enjoy the sex more.
So where this becomes really interesting, like as nerds, is when you start to know the things for yourself that are those buttons that work to increase or heighten your turn on, whether it's erotic, whether it's sensual, whether it's, like adrenaline play. And this is something that I've always been so impressed with some of our friends, because I never, growing up vanilla, and, because my kink is mostly like being slutty and group sex, even though I can play in kinky ways, I'm not getting turned on by beating you up in the way that some of my friends get turned on by beating you up.
Sure. You're a service switch.
Yeah. But what's interesting is when you start to know these things about yourself or about your lovers, you can then start weaving these things together to create these scenes.
Yeah.
And also even use these things about you. And this is where some of our friends are so amazing, is the conversations they're having with you. It's almost like there's this scene version of the intake interview where they're learning all these things about you because they know good questions to ask. And then, like, this is the palette of your sexuality and your turn on and your nerdy kinkiness, and then they can just paint this picture and create a scene for you that starts to really like ping pong on all these little pieces of you that heighten the whole experience.
Right.
Now, for me, that sounds like a lot of work. I'm like, oh my God. But because I think that my creativity in sex just doesn't occur like that. Whereas for them, that's how the world just occurs to them like that.
Yeah.
And it's amazing.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, it's interesting because like I've been on my own journey around BDSM lately, and I've been really trying to do some deep interrogation into like what orientation I have towards it, and I find that for me it feels. I don't want to say it feels different because I certainly at a sex party can be a service top. I'm always a service top at sex parties. Where somebody likes to be hit, I'll hit them. Somebody likes to be stepped on, I'll step on them. Somebody likes to be fucked real hard with the strap on, I'll fuck them real hard with the strap on. And that's just a way for me to be social. It's just a way for me to be connected. And it's nice, I like it, but it doesn't feel like sex. Sex to me is when when I am able to give a person like deep sensual pleasure. And when somebody's able to give me deep sensual pleasure, all of the other stuff it can feel fussy if I'm not really into somebody, or it can just feel extra. Like I'll do it for somebody I really like to. I'll dirty talk and I'll add all sorts of flair. But ultimately, like, are we making each other's bodies feel good? And that's just how I orient towards sex almost exclusively, which is, it makes it hard for me when I'm with people who are very erotic, who want me to wear a costume and do a whole scene. I'm like, it's just different. It's not, they're not giving me pleasure through that.
So the way that's different, if I understand you correctly, the way that's different for me is similarly to erotic versus sensual. For me, I'm deeply satisfied by creating a nourishing experience for like your soul.
Sure.
Like is the best way I can describe it. So if I've helped you nourish yourself and I've been able, and this is where I think for my kinky friends who first taught me about like being a switch, like a service switch, what that meant. I could, if you're a top, I can be a bottom. I'm not a very kinky bottom, but I can, you can beat me up like, because pain's...
But if that's good for them, not
Yeah,
for you.
because pain doesn't turn me on, but I'm, from a martial arts background, like, I've had the shit kicked out of me, and Sensei still loves me. But, and then if you need to be the bottom and you need me to be the top, I have skills that I can use, and I can listen to bodies pretty well, it seems, so let's go there. But for me, it's about the nourishing piece, where if I could help you touch that part of you that leaves you feeling more nourished than depleted, I feel like I did my job.
Right.
Like, I got to be of service.
Right.
And me being of service in that way, especially around sex.
Yeah.
Because I can have a nourishing conversation, we can touch souls conversationally.
Yeah.
And that feels really nice.
Yeah.
But what really is deep for me is being able to nourish you or help you nourish yourself sexually, and that nourishes me very deeply.
Yeah.
And then the things I still try to work on are pushing myself, not aggressively, but like trying to learn myself more and be more vulnerable so that I can ask for people to help me receive nourishing myself sexually.
Yeah.
And that's still tricky for me because it's so much easier for me to just be of service than to put in all the work, which again just makes me more and more impressed with my friends who know themselves so well.
Yeah. Well, I'm wondering if there's a gender component to it. I feel like for me, like
gender or socialization,
I think in the way I'm using it, it's collapsed, right? Because gender is socialization.
Like how we're socialized.
Yeah. So for me, as a woman, cis woman, I am but people respond to me because I have toppy energy, and that's always been some ways that people respond to me, not necessarily something that I feel intrinsically about myself, which is great. And I love, but like alpha female type stuff.
I get why they feel that.
I know you do, because you're my partner.
Those of you listening, we understand, right?
But so it's great, but it's like it's a thing that people see in me, not something I see in myself, right? Which is fine.
Sure.
But how that applies to the sex stuff is like, for me as a woman who likes receiving sensual pleasure, me kind of demanding sensual pleasure is a way in which I am a top. And so even though to turn off my brain and receive pleasure that really does kind of circumvent the prefrontal cortex, like I am technically vulnerable and I'm technically receptive in that space, but it's in my power, so to speak. I hate that phrase, but it's basically in the idea of like, I am in control of the scene by demanding somebody give me pleasure. Mm-hmm. And again, I don't know if people would see this from the outside. I certainly feel it from the inside, so to speak. And that to me is, again, that's a way for people to access their erotic turn-on, is if they can say, oh, I'm serving her by giving her this sensual experience. Well, then it's their ability to access their eroticism, my ability to access my sensuality, and we can meet in the middle in a way that feels really good to me. And I feel like, so when you're talking about being vulnerable and it's hard for you to receive pleasure, like, I don't think that receiving pleasure or being vulnerable requires you to be submissive.
No, I wasn't actually framing it like that.
Okay.
It was more receptive, which again, gets collapsed. And at the same time, I think the easier thing, and also the caveat here is, I think there's an overachievingness in American Western culture, as opposed to.
Yeah.
I think I just was redundant there, but
no, not Western and American culture are different things.
Yeah, but there's not like Eastern American culture, is there?
Yeah, but there are other forms of Western.
Yes,
culture.
that's okay. Good, thanks. I got worried, but the idea of the overachievingness, and especially as we sit in a Manhattan apartment, right? The rat race, the genetically engineered Olympic rat race of Manhattan. Where you will, become stronger by the very virtue of swimming up Fifth Avenue, right?
Yeah.
I'm also acknowledging that there's unconsciously a part of me that is pushing me that I have to be more vulnerable.
Yeah.
I have to dig deeper.
Like kind of performative vulnerability.
Yeah, like, well, not even performative. I think it's
like achievement based.
It's you're not as a sex educator, as somebody whose career is in this field. If I am not digging deeper into the things that hold me back and the things that I am afraid of asking for, I'm not worthy. There's a value. Like, it's almost like I'm going to screw this up, but I will attempt it. It's like the capitalistic, like, your value is measured in your productivity.
Sure.
In the self-help sex arena and sex ed arena, if I am not digging deeper to unleash the things that I am unaware of that are holding me back, somehow I'm a failure.
Yes.
And I just want to acknowledge that that's bullshit.
Right.
Unless it turns you on, if that's your kink, go for it, right? But at the same time, like, I'm being ruled by some of the ways I was socialized, and even if I'm conscious about it, it doesn't mean it's still not in play.
Right.
So I just want to acknowledge that, because if I'm having, and this is, for the listeners too, like, if you're having really satisfying sex, maybe nothing's broken.
Right.
Like, if all you like doing is eating pussy, go have a wonderful life eating pussy.
You'll find many people who would appreciate
There's a lot of people out there who need more pussy.
Yeah.
8.
Yeah. Well, okay, so this is a beautiful little segue. Let's segue back into the people who came to the sex parties you threw in the space. Because when we talk about venues, this
is the goodbye to the apartment episode.
But we talk about dungeons, we talk about the clubs, but there's also venues like this apartment that hosted cuddle parties, that hosted massage parties, that hosted sex parties. So what about this space that you created attracted people? Like, what did people come here for versus a club in?
So as a nerd, part of it was a lot of the things I threw here were free. So again, there's the rabbit hole of, like, looking at, commerce. I don't think in this apartment I ever threw a play party, an orgy, for those of us who are older and not using the words that the kids are using these days. But I never, to my recollection, I could be wrong, I never threw a play party in this apartment that I ever charged money for. Maybe we had a cup out and said, hey, if you want to toss in some money for snacks.
I think we had a fundraiser for Camp Beaverton, right?
Maybe.
The Strap-On-a-thon, the very first Strap-On-a-thon?
I don't know. Was it here?
Yeah.
I don't remember that. But again, like, a fundraiser is different than I'm charging $30 per person. For
this was a party.
An orgy.
Throwing. Yeah, this was a party, not a.
So as somebody who, like, a lot of people have asked me for advice on how to throw an orgy. I'm like, okay, so what kind of orgy? Are you charging money? Is this to the public, or this for your friends?
Yeah.
And you're charging money to your friends?
Yeah.
Or is this for free to your friends? Most people don't throw free for the public orgies.
Oh, God.
That's not really how that works.
Real risky.
And there's reasons. I think there are smart reasons why you don't, and why money helps for certain things. But again, that's maybe a different topic. With Cuddle Party, the Cuddle Parties that were here in the beginning were free, and then some good friends of ours who were very smart business people, they saw what Marsha Baczynski and I, co-founder of Cuddle Party, they saw the value of what we tapped into before we did. And by value, I mean what it was doing for people's hearts and souls. Not that we could make money off of it. But those business friends of ours said, you have to charge money so that Cuddle Party is sustainable. And so in the beginning, I think we charged $20 per person, I think. It might have been less in the beginning. But, like, they were like, for this to continue, it needs to be run like a business, or else it will just go away.
Yeah.
So there was Cuddle Party. I also ran an event that was for body workers, for people that did massage therapy for a living, we would get together and we just called it Massage Party. This predated Cuddle Party. And it was for body workers to take an evening off and practice receiving touch, because so many massage therapists are touch starved. And what we would do is get together and do like groups of 4 or 5 people, like 8-handed massage, and then rotate through. And those, we didn't charge money, but people could, chip in $5 or $10. And that money started when we had too many people for this apartment to all be laying down and do 4 people on one person. So we actually needed money to come in so we could cover the cost of renting a yoga studio.
Got it.
And then we also, in my community of friends from all over the world that we call ourselves Freedom Community, when I was really active in Freedom Community, we would have intentional parties. It was basically a party with homework, like, thought questions about yourself to inspire conversation for the evening. But we would have those parties with homework or just a regular gathering of friends in this space as well. And those were never about money.
Yeah.
Unless you just wanted to chip in $5 because we bought a bunch of, tortilla chips and salsa or something like that. So now I've effectively forgotten your actual question. It was more just to lay out, there were so many different kinds of events that happened in this apartment. And that's uncommon. I don't think everybody that I know throws all these different kinds of events as a part of their social expression for their friends.
Right.
And so that's also kind of unique. I have a couple of friends from New York still who like to throw a cocktail party.
Sure.
Part of it is because they have a fucking killer apartment for a cocktail party. If you have an apartment that is 100 square feet and only has a plug-in hot pan, pad, and a tea kettle, that person's usually not throwing a party.
Well, let's talk about the creative use of space then. This place is 250 square feet, and you threw orgies here.
Yeah, it's like a TARDIS. It's bigger on the inside.
So how did you do that?
A lot of, let's just say less than more furniture. So furniture in the living room, which is where we're sitting now, mostly consisted of like a flip and fuck kind of futon mattress and then an actual mattress on the floor.
Okay.
And that's because the actual bedroom in this apartment is so tiny, it's about the size of a king size mattress, if that it made more sense when one person lived here or when I was living here with my partner, whoever I was, partnered to at the time. We would usually put the bed in the living room and use the bedroom basically as a huge closet.
Yeah.
And then for those of you who will never see the bathroom in this apartment, it is laughably small.
Yeah, it's. I love sitting.
I've seen car trunks
sitting on the
bigger.
Toilet and then resting my forehead on the opposite wall.
Yeah.
While I'm peeing.
Yeah, it's hilarious. Like we tried to have a threesome in the shower there. You and I never did. We never had a threesome in that shower, did we?
I don't remember.
Yeah, but I've had threesomes in that shower, and it's not like basically like how one person when you have 2 people in the shower, there's one person who's not under the shower.
Yeah, I hate that.
When you have a threesome in that shower, there's one person who's actually not in the shower. That's how tiny the shower is.
They're dry and cold.
It's crazy. It's crazy. Not a good shower for threesomes.
So when was your first orgy here?
The unintentional orgy was New Year's Eve of 1999, where we did party like it was 1999.
Were you worried about Y2K? Unplugged all your phones?
No, we had better things to be focused on. But that was an unofficial orgy because I hadn't gotten to the Reid sex educator owning my sluttiness, my polyamory, non-monogamousness. I was just teetering. My toe was just dipped into the pool of my sexual awakening and renaissance. And Cuddle Party would start in 2004, so this was several years before Cuddle Party happened. And I had friends who would ask me, very amazing lesbian couple at the time had asked me if I would throw them an orgy, because they were like maybe a couple of years further along in their exploration of themselves. And they're like, Reid, we want you to throw us an orgy.
Was that person here at the party last night?
They were.
Oh,
I don't know if we should name that person.
I'm not going to name them. I'm just saying that they were
They
here
were
last
here.
night, too.
They were here last night too.
They were here for the first orgy, and they were here for the first party.
No, they weren't here for the first orgy. They were the reason there was a first orgy.
Wait, what?
Yeah. So let's explain. This person and her partner at the time, we'll call them J and J.
Because that's not ambiguous. But J and L.
J and L. Okay, so J and L asked me if I would throw them an orgy, and I asked them why, and they said, we trust that you would invite the right kinds of people. And I was like, okay. And that kind of floored me. And they asked me this at my Christmas party, which I would annually host at Merc Bar, back when Merc Bar was around, which was filled with all of my friends from all these different walks of life, from bartending life and all the bartending bars I'd ever worked at, from being an actor and working on commercials, I had also produced some short film at the time, from stage combat and stunt choreography stuff, like my friends from art school, like anybody I knew that I really loved was welcome to the Christmas party, and everybody just
was great.
They were awesome people,
Yeah.
so they all met awesome people, and people became friends.
Yeah.
So they're like, we want you to throw us an orgy, and I was kind of floored by that. So I spent most of the rest of the night at my Christmas party asking other people, like, if I threw an orgy, would you come to it? And they were like everybody I asked was like, absolutely. And I'm like, why?
Wow.
And they're like, because you would invite the right people. I think they were all heavily biased by the Christmas party vibe.
Sure.
But I was like, wow, this is interesting. I'm curious. And I was on the verge of starting to, own who I was sexually.
Yeah.
I was teetering into polyamory and whatnot. And I'm like, still doesn't feel safe to throw an orgy. But I had also never done ecstasy before. So I basically chickened out and said to my lesbian couple friends, I was like, I'll throw an ecstasy party, but not an orgy.
Okay.
Which, looking back now, is almost like code for I'm throwing an orgy anyway. If we do ecstasy, which is not actually the truth, but that's... I'm sure some of my friends are like, ecstasy party. But that was not me. I was like, I'm not ready for an orgy, but I'll try ecstasy.
Was Cuddle Party already going at this point?
No, this would be 5 years before Cuddle Party.
That makes sense. So you did not know yet the power of sensual touch or like communal touch at that point.
I did not know the power of touch, period, in the ways... Because communal touch now, as a nerd, you break it down to non-sexual touch versus sexual touch. What is sensual touch?
Right.
Does kissing count? Like, these are all questions we tried to answer in Cuddle Party.
Sure. But with ecstasy, it's just kind of like, I mean, for those of you who have not done ecstasy basically just makes all touch feel pretty good for most people. And so it feels extra good. And so in throwing an ecstasy party, you're basically encouraging people to touch each other.
It's basically a drug-fueled, cuddle puddle.
Yeah.
Whether sex happens or not. And this is also just very interesting is the times I've tried ecstasy, I'm more interested in the touch than in the getting laid aspect.
Sure.
Which is just interesting to think about.
Yeah.
So, New Year's Eve, 1999, I invite a small group of friends to come to this apartment. After the ball drops, I'm like, I'll be home by 12:30. Get here by 1.
Yeah.
We all drop ecstasy. Most of my friends had tried it before. Didn't know. One of my good friends who was here, who's very versed in the drug arts, was like, you need 1.5 tabs just because you're a huge person.
Huge.
Huge person. And also, I tend not to feel things appropriately. So, from a martial arts perspective, I can take a lot of impact.
So your neural pathways may now not be as sensitive as others.
Yeah. So this person was like, you know what? Let's just give you an extra half. And then an hour into it, everybody's tripping. I'm
Rolling.
not.
It's called rolling.
Everyone's rolling. Thank you. See, that's how bad I am. I'm so not cool. Everyone's rolling. I'm not. So my friend, in their wisdom, gives me another tab.
Oh, good God.
I
A whole
know.
tab?
Yeah,
so you've
yeah,
done 2.5 now?
Yeah.
Oh, God.
And then, like, literally, like, as fate would have it, like, 10 minutes later, I'm tripping. Rolling. Is that what rolling down the river means?
I do not think so.
Okay. All right. So now I can't get that song out of my head. So basically, we're all rolling, and then I'm on the phone with my friends who are the reason I'm throwing this ecstasy party.
And they're not coming.
And they're stuck in Times Square, and they're like, we can't make it. And I'm like, well, okay, but some of us are already tripping and rolling. I say I had it right the first time. I'm like, some of us have started rolling. I haven't started rolling yet. And I look over, and one of my great friends is blowing another great friend of mine. And I'm like, I gotta go. Bye.
Sorry, lesbians.
I just threw the lesbians under the bus at Times Square, and then turned to my friend getting a blowjob, and I was and all of my other friends who are rolling are watching, and I'm just looking at them, and I'm like, can I take your clothes off? Like, that looks a little constrained.
So wait, pause. Have you ever been in a group sex scenario before this?
No.
Wow.
This was the beginning of the beginning.
So you'd never been to an orgy before?
Never been to an orgy before.
So this is the first time you're seeing your friends with their erect penises in each other's mouths.
Yes. And this, now, truth be told, I'd had a couple of threesomes before.
Okay.
I think 3.
Okay.
Successful threesomes.
And you were living with a lover at the time here?
No, I was living no, maybe. I can't remember. My friend Bruno might have lived here.
Okay.
I'm not sure.
Not a lover.
Not a lover. So many things to think about. But basically, I'd had maybe 5 or 6 attempts at threesomes, and I think 3 of them had been successful.
Okay.
But no group situations. Certainly hadn't seen this friend of mine's penis in this friend of mine's mouth. And then they looked uncomfortable because they were clothed. And so I just said to my friend, I'm like, may I take your clothes off? Will that be helpful? And he was like, yes, please. And so I took his clothes off, and then I asked my friend who was filleting him, would you like your clothes off as well? Because that seemed like normal. Like, I'm a host. I'm helping. And then I take her clothes off, and then I just turn to the next person closest, and I'm like, would you like your clothes off as well? And what it turned into this, like, ritual of me disrobing each one of these people that were very special to me. Aww. And then what I didn't realize is as I was disrobing them, I started rolling.
Oh, wow.
Like, it started, like, the come up or the
peak.
The peak. It was just starting. So by the end of that, I was naked, and then my friends took my clothes off, and then I started making out with somebody, and somebody else was like, rubbing my shoulders, and then like it was just like a big pit of people kissing or just nuzzling, and some people having sex, some people not having sex, and then the joke or the story as it goes is like in the middle of all this, I'm like rolling hard now. And it just feels like all arms and legs and like something from some, for those of you who are comic book nerds, remember, do you remember the Conan the Barbarian comic book cover? It also might have been a heavy metal comic book cover, or it's Kull or Krull, who is a Marvel comic book, where he's coming out of this pile of writhing limbs and holding a sword above him.
Oh, wow.
I can't remember if it's Conan the Barbarian, heavy metal, or Kull.
Krull.
I can't remember if it's Krull or Kull. I think it's Kull, but then there was a science fiction movie called Krull, which is really bad, but cool at the same time. I remember I'm in this pile of arms and legs and just like all this oxytocin and endorphins just rushing through my system. And I remember just kind of slowly standing up, like, and imagining this cover. and I just stand up underneath the light bulbs that are right above us right now. And I just remember like saying really loudly, drugs are amazing. I understand why people do them now.
Understand why people.
And then
Wow.
all these hands kind of reached up and pulled my naked body back down, and I'm like, oh my God.
Somebody fill his mouth with
Yeah,
something.
it was exactly. So that was the beginning of it.
So that was the first orgy, accidental orgy.
That was the first accidental orgy.
Then when did you start throwing?
There would be another accidental orgy years later.
Okay.
But that's actually a body storytelling story. You can link to it maybe or
Sure.
send Patreon people to it. So then after that was so life-changing for me that I really spent the next couple of weeks really thinking about like what worked for me, what didn't. I need more of this sensuality, but I didn't need the drug piece because that's still not tricky for me. But I grew up in an alcoholic family, and so alcohol and drugs. Alcohol I'm very fond of, but drugs have never quite ever been my thing. I've tried things over the years, and I think pot is still not something that works really well for me, and I can't tell if it's just my body or if I just haven't smoked the right kind of thing, or maybe I need to do edibles. People are way nerdier about pot these days, and maybe someday I'll figure out something that works better for my body. But my preference around sex is pretty much to be sober.
Yeah.
And sober group sex for me also relieves, and sober meaning no alcohol, no booze, or no drugs. That also kind of relieves my worry that something might get weird or slippery because of consent. Like having a glass of wine or a beer or something like that at a play party doesn't bother me. But like doing, 5 shots and then diving into the deep end of the orgy pool.
Yeah. We've both been
really
to orgies
cool.
where people are definitely like on psychedelics or definitely altering their experience dramatically.
And now I've had group sex on psychedelics, but it was intended for that.
Right. I think what I'm saying is when people go to a sex party where they don't know a bunch of people and they're doing like a ton of GHB or they're doing a ton of something where it's like the consent piece, like I think people are pretty getting better at being well versed around consent and alcohol, a little bit about consent and like booze or other drugs, but when it comes to like actual like mind altering substances that aren't necessarily often associated with frat parties or actual places where we're talking a lot about consent, it gets a lot weirder. It's like I need to be on shrooms to be able to enjoy sex. It's like, well, okay, that feels like something that needs to be unpacked.
Yeah, and so again, I got pretty also from doing so much ecstasy that first time, my ecstasy hangover was horrible.
Yeah.
And so I think I also got a very strong visceral response to not liking it because of the aftermath for me.
Sure.
And this was before, I had friends being like, you need to drink orange juice and do this and do that.
Yeah. Aftercare is important in a lot of different ways,
period.
Not just for sex.
Yeah. So the next few months would be me talking to my friends who were at the accidental orgy and telling them like, listen, like I want more of that with less of the drugs.
Yeah.
So if what you said at the Christmas party was true, you would trust me to invite the right people. I'm gonna throw an orgy.
Nice.
Will you come to it?
Yeah.
And that was, I don't know when we threw the first one. I wasn't journaling back then, so I can't look back. But, in 2000, I started throwing play parties in the space. And then I think after that is when I started throwing massage parties. I'm pretty sure massage parties might have come sooner, and I'm not sure. I could get that wrong. But I also recognized the importance of touch that didn't lead to sex, and had so many massage friends that I traded massages with and it was hard to get them to take a night off, that the best way to massage, in my opinion, this is biased, the best way to massage a body worker who has trouble taking a night off is you get like 4 body workers to massage them all at once and just overload them in a loving way and just get them like to take 20 minutes off rather than, an hour.
Right.
And then that seemed to work really well for my friends. And then in 2004, because I'd been running play parties and massage parties, it came to pass the idea for cuddle parties. And the first cuddle party ever was thrown in February 28th, 2004, leap year. So it was February 29th, 2004, the first cuddle party was thrown in this apartment. And then Marsha Baczynski came to the second one. And then Marsha and I teamed up by the third one. And then the fourth cuddle party, I think, is the one that the press came to. And then a month later, it was covered by the Drudge Report, I think. I think it was Drudge Report.
Oh, wow.
And who had broken the Monica Lewinsky story a couple of months before.
Oh, wow.
So the minute it came out on Drudge, pretty sure it was Drudge, Cuddle Party became a nationwide phenomenon.
I found your portfolio of all your news clips when I got here the first night we arrived. I arrived in New York.
Yeah.
And looking through those, like, you got huge, around the world.
Yeah. And I also want to shout out to, not just to Marsha, because Marsha was the one who hand-coded the first website for Cuddle Party. And it was because of Marsha and also our good friend Karen. Karen blogged, back in the day when blogs were just starting, blogged about coming to a cuddle party and kissing a really hot guy. And that blog is what got picked up by Drudge Report. So if it wasn't for Karen and if it wasn't for Marsha, Cuddle Party probably never would have become anything big.
When did you throw the last cuddle party in this space?
In this space? Ooh. Marsha might know that. Marsha, when was it? We threw... That first year, we probably threw 150 cuddle parties here. We were throwing like 2 to 3 a week because we had so many news agencies that wanted to cover us.
Jesus.
So...
all those people walked up 5 flights of stairs.
Yep. Del Williams, who created Eve's Garden, which was the first women-owned sex toy store ever in Manhattan, and ever in in North America that we know of. Del Williams climbed those stairs to come to a cuddle party when she was in her 80s.
Whoa.
And I thought she was going to die, and then I was going to be the one who killed Del Williams. She has since passed on.
But it wasn't your fault.
R.I.P. Del. But yeah, we had so many amazing people come here. We had ex-Marines coming back from Afghanistan. Like, it was unbelievable, the people that came through these doors to cuddle and do this kooky, idea. Yeah. And now, 14 years, 2004, it's 2018. Yeah, 14 years later, cuddle parties still happening all over the world.
So I could imagine, like, for me, it makes perfect sense, right? Like, you were a touch nerd. You wanted to explore the different ways in which touch mattered to people's lives. But from the outside, I could imagine, if you're throwing orgies and you're throwing massage parties, that cuddle party feels creepy or weird.
Well, so back then, we didn't talk about, because I hadn't become, read about sex, the sex educator person. So I was the cuddle party, the king of cuddle party, the sultan of flannel.
Not Sultan of Snuggle? I mean, it's
Sultan of Snuggle, yeah, I guess. The something of flannel. We didn't talk about the play parties because it was people were having so much trouble understanding that a group of adults cuddling didn't turn into an orgy.
Right.
But for me and my friends, it was obvious, like, touch is a spectrum.
Right.
And body workers can massage each other and have it not turn into an orgy.
Right.
So it's...
Dancers can touch each other without turning an orgy. Yeah.
So it just made perfect sense to me
Yeah.
and to Marcia and to a lot of other people, like, oh, non-sexual touch, we need as adults to have more affectionate, consensual touch
Yeah.
in our lives, sustained touch. And the idea of like cuddling, and calling it Cuddle Party and having rules. I mean, people can go to cuddleparty.com and look at the rules of cuddling. It's like, how do you create containers and create community agreements for strangers? Mm-hmm. And then that, when you start trying to solve those problems, how do you get a bunch of people who don't know each other to feel safe around exchanging non-sexual, consensual touch? You need rules, because you need to get them to understand how this works in a culture where we think adults can't control themselves. Right? And so the way you do that, the easiest way to get them to understand it is you have an opening circle, a welcome circle, where you go over the rules. Mm-hmm. And you have some ice-breaking exercises, and you show them how this is done. Like, so when you start looking at it like from a design perspective, it's like, oh, well, here's a way that I think will work to give them the context, to show them the rules, to set up the boundary setting, to give them time to practice the boundary setting with the ice-breaking exercises. And then we'll give them time to cuddle. Mm-hmm. And then what's a good amount of time for people to feel full but not too full? Right. And so that's how we fiddled with, is it 2 hours? Not enough. Is it 4 hours? Too much. So 3.5 hours, when you add the welcome circle into that, 3.5 hours is kind of perfect. Mm-hmm. So, and we had hundreds and hundreds of opportunities to tinker with that. Yeah. And that's basically how we honed Cuddle Party, but we got a lot of it pretty, we were pretty, like 95% of the first Cuddle Party was exactly how every other Cuddle Party would be for even up until today. It hasn't changed a lot. We've changed a couple of the rules, and then the welcome circle language changed a little bit because it was written in the beginning based on my sense of humor, which is not everyone's sense of humor. No. But Marcia Baczynski and Betty Martin and Lynn Daly, who were the early people that did the nonprofit for Cuddle Party. There's a board now and more people involved, and I don't remember everybody's names. I stepped away from Cuddle Party to go off and do sex education, again, because if I'm teaching blowjob workshops, people are not going to trust Cuddle Party. Right. And that's why it just wasn't appropriate for us to be talking about, we were also throwing play parties. Well,
but the play parties were private, so it wasn't like you were throwing in the same space with the same invite list.
Yeah, it wasn't. A Cuddle Party never turns into an orgy, because that's not what a Cuddle Party is. Right. And a play party, for me personally, the way I like to run and participate in play parties, there's a welcome circle. Yeah. Here are the rules, the house rules for this event. Mm-hmm. Let's have some ice-breaking exercises. Let's have a big conversation about safer sex. Yeah. And that's the way that there's many, many different ways to throw a play party, to throw an orgy, to throw a kink event. I'm particular to the way, to a welcome circle kind of thing, but that's me. And I'm also heavily influenced by how well Cuddle Parties work and how all the play parties I've thrown and my friends who've been inspired by a similar kind of format, like these are hundreds and hundreds of attempts that seem to have gone pretty well.
Well, it's funny because it kind of does circle back to what we were just what you were talking about, the danger aspect of certain venues versus the safety of others. I mean, it seems like your jam is removing as much of the mystery or the fright aspects as possible by being crystal clear about what one can expect, how to honor the space, how to do a good job at the sex party. Yeah. Whereas, for a dungeon, it's like you might have rules posted on the wall, but ultimately it's kind of like a free for all, and it's like, it's a very libertarian environment. Take care of your shit.
Yeah, but there's also community agreements and protocols inside of kink, air quotes.
Oh yeah, but every space has their own rules, and that's what I mean. Like, it's some places will have very long lists of rules, some places will have very short lists, some places will pretend to have no rules until you break one, and then they'll tell you. But you've always had spaces that are very much about like making sure everybody, like the welcome circles, like the doors close at a certain point. You can't get in after a certain point.
Yeah.
Everybody talks to each other. Everybody talks openly about what they're there for and if, what their experiences are. And so it kind of helps, personally, my experience, I've been to a number of different sex parties with various different sort of styles. I like parties that have welcome circles because I have a little bit of social anxiety, but I do like to play with people. So if I can go around the room and see, oh, this person's sexy. Oh, and they're into what I'm into. Great. Now I know how to cruise them, essentially, or I know how to talk to them about what we're into. Whereas when you go to a sex party that doesn't have a welcome circle, it's almost like relies on you to have random interactions with people, or be just a real aggressive flirt where you see somebody you think is sexy, and then you walk across the room and then you talk to them about it.
Well, and again, like if for those of you who've been to like house parties or cocktail parties where there's a lot of strangers, like when you have that hostess who likes to run a little ice-breaking game or some game where you have to go find, it can be silly. Like you get the torn half of a playing card and you have to find the other person at the party with the other playing card. Like it gives you an excuse to go meet people. Even body storytelling, our friend Dixie, she has her bango, which is basically dirty bingo.
Yeah.
We have to go talk to other people to fill in your bingo box.
Right. So icebreakers.
And those icebreakers, you're promoting a way for people to connect. Like there's a lot of human psychology reasons why to do that. Where it gets tricky, and just to circle back really quickly, like my year this year has really been, looking at in my accountability process, where I had incomplete ideas and understandings of power differentials and power dynamics. And, we never, hopefully none of us ever stop learning, like, and hopefully, people are always trying to learn better ways to do things and upgrade how they're interacting in the world. And so, things I'm still doing now is like recombing through how I look at workshop design and even play party design, and where can I be doing things better?
Yeah.
Because for me as a cisgendered white guy who's, people, tell me that I'm charismatic. I'm also super insecure about certain things and grew up in a fucked up family with parents who really loved us, but fuck all their marriage and communication skills. I'm still trying to figure out, like, is there a better way to do this that reduces harm for as many people as you can? Because less harm is better, unless it's negotiated kinky harm, right? Consensual harm.
Hurt and harm aren't the same thing.
Yeah, but like, how do you reduce harm and maximize agency and learning so that people can just be better to each other? And then when you apply that to pleasure and exploration, like, how do you help yourself and your communities just walk through the world, engaging with each other in ways that are really tricky, and there's a lot of gray.
Yeah.
In this process for me this year, I've learned so many things, but I've also learned a lot of questions that I can't find answers to yet.
Yeah.
And I think the answers are that there's, at certain points there's no fucking answer, and you're just taking a risk.
Yeah.
And and then to bring it back to this conversation, like, so many risks were taken in this apartment, and I hope at the end of all this, when you and I walk out for the last time, and that's sad, it'll just be weird not having this apartment and maybe never coming back in here again.
Yeah.
But hopefully, as we close the door on 316 East 70th.
I just told everybody your address.
Yeah, but not the apartment line, not the apartment number. Somebody last night at the party said there should be a little plaque on the wall. But hopefully at the end of the era of this apartment, like, more pleasure was done here than harm. That's what I want.
Sounds like a really good epitaph for you too, darling.
I hope so. With great power comes great responsibility. Thank you, Stanley.
I'm going to miss the light in here, the morning light.
Yeah, talk about sensuality. Like, as an art person who went to art school, light, man. It's all about fucking light.
Falling in love with you in this apartment. Like, there's a part of me, and again, this might be, like, gender normative, but, like, there's a part of me that really enjoys waking up with a lover and feeling beautiful. And a lot of that has to do with lighting.
Well, with me, it has to do with if I'm not wearing my glasses, everything's got like a Barbara Walters focus.
No, like I have a history of dating people with bad eyesight.
It just everything looks great.
Yeah, no, I'm like I always feel like a sexy watercolor.
Oh, my sexy watercolor! You're my sexy.
No, don't put on your
watercolor.
glasses. No.
Don't ruin it.
Yeah, so with the light in here it's weird because it's New York, so there's not a whole lot of it.
It's indirect light that's bouncing off the brick of the building across basically the courtyard or the alley.
Yeah, but this is southern facing, so you do get some direct light through
and
here.
we're the top floor, so
now everybody knows which apartment it is.
No, you've got two choices. Choose wisely.
Yes. Anyway, so yes. But the lighting in here is...
You can totally edit out the address if you want.
I mean, it's at this point, we're not going to be here anymore.
Yeah.
People can come by.
Hey, if you're listening to this and you figure out you live in this apartment, sorry!
You live in a very good apartment. Yeah, but the lighting in here is pretty divine. I remember one of the first nights I slept over here. It's a junior one bedroom, but the bed is in the living room. This is when you were living with Marcia as your partner, and obviously we're in an open relationship. And I remember a bunch of people slept over because there was a party that we all went to, and so we all slept at this party, or we all went to this party and then slept over. And I remember waking up, and in the two windows that you have that face outside the back of the building, you had some beautiful plants that were draped over the windows, but then you also had a prism, and you had a mini disco ball. And I remember I woke up, and then like a couple of other friends woke up, and Marcia woke up, and it's one of those, like, you know, for those of you who've done that kind of like early 20s partying where everybody just crashes at a friend's house and you all wake up together. That's a sensual experience in of itself, right? Seeing your friends kind of like a little strung out, a little hungover, but like cuddly and cozy, even if you're not lovers. And you woke up and you started making coffee, and I remember Marcia asked, "Oh, honey, can you just spin the prism?" Because the sun was at the right part of the sky, that whatever it was, 9 a.m. or something, where you just kind of gently spun the prism, and it just shot rainbows all over every wall, and it kind of just gently kind of twisting around the room. And I just remember this moment of just being like, I was just starting to fall in love with you. This was my first time spending any significant time in New York City, not in a hotel, right? And I remember just feeling that moment of like, this feels a little bit like magic, which is what I feel like falling in love really does. Just a little bit of magic.
And then I gave her coffee and totally closed the deal.
And then you gave me coffee and closed the deal, because you brought me coffee almost every morning since then. And yeah.
We should do a whole podcast on coffee.
I think that probably already exists. Anyway, so that's one of my favorite memories of this space. There are a lot of memories of the space. Certainly sex parties in the space. A lot of fun. I also remember from that same visit, it was the first not Burning Man sex party I'd ever been to. And it was a brunch party, because you threw brunch parties here. Brunch sex parties, which I thought was so great because it's daylight.
I'm sure other people before us threw orgies during the day, but with my circle of friends, for us it was like, what? We're going to do a play party during daylight? And I'm like, not just daylight, brunch.
Yeah, so you like wake up, roll out of bed, you know, have a cup of coffee maybe, and then head over to Reid's place. And we got French toast going, we got bacon going, we got mimosas, and you just crawl right back onto the floor and cuddle. And it's something about the neurochemistry of mid-morning. It's just a very different vibe.
Yeah, and because again, like, I think, like, coming back to the illicitness and so much of, I mean, certainly for me too, like from my bartending days and one night stands, and then, you know, having a second one night stand with that person a week or two later, and then months later we become lovers. just a string of consecutive one night stands with the same person, right? There was a lot of my sexual awakening around my sluttiness that happened at, after 4 a.m. between the hours of 4 a.m. and dawn, right? And then to be doing play parties at night, but then to be like, wait a minute, like, we can do this during the day.
Yeah.
And that was a whole other thing. And then you're mixing food and friendship and cuddling with, French toast and syrup and and then it's like, what, we're gonna fuck too?
Well, that's the thing, like the quality of morning sex is very different from the quality of 3 a.m. sex, right? Whether or not alcohol's involved, but I think energetically, right? The people that you're having sex with in the morning tend to be people you like a little bit more necessarily than the people you're having sex with right after the bar closes. And so I think there's this immediate, what's the word I'm looking for? There's an immediate kind of community building experience that happens where it's like broad daylight. Like you're not hiding behind substances or hiding behind darkness. Yeah. You're just intentional. It's very intentional. And again, this not everybody's cup of tea, but for that to be my first sex party experience, not some dungeon in a basement in Brooklyn, not some penthouse with a bunch of fucking rich bitches, like just some nice place where you can just kind of cuddle up with people and have the homey vibe. Yeah.
But you'd had group sex before that.
Yeah, I'd had group sex before, but orgies don't feel like the same thing. Like group sex is when like
sex with friends,
3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 of you are already kind of hanging out and smooching and stuff, and it turns into sex, kind of like your ecstasy party. Yeah. A group sex, like an orgy or a play party, is a party intentionally designed for sexuality to be permitted and accepted, and that's different from accidental orgy.
Accidental orgy, good name for a band. Who's starting that band?
But I find that so that was a special vibe here too, is that kind of the sensuality of the snuggle and the morning and the fuzzy orange juice and French toast and smooches. Yeah.
And then also I think too, for people who don't go to play parties, like who haven't had the privilege or just choose not to, because that's another choice. People think that an orgy just looks like fucking all the time. Yeah. And we get some misrepresentations of group sex from porn, because you don't see the half an hour that everybody sits around watching their other friends fuck while they eat French toast.
Yeah, or catch up with somebody you hadn't seen in a couple months.
And have a conversation, and then the person next to you...
process somebody's breakup.
Yeah, and while somebody next to you asks you if you could put this dildo into that harness and then help them put it on because they're fisting this person right now and don't want to stop. Like all those things, like... group sex as just a social event is like not everybody in culture has gotten to that place yet. No. Right? Like you come over and maybe you hang out and bake with your friends or cook dinner with your friends and everyone gets caught up, or have them over for brunch, but we don't mix the brunch and the sex. And if you're very lucky, maybe you have friends where people are cooking and some of you are cuddling on the couch and getting your touch needs met. Right. Right. And then also I know a lot of people in sex positive community were completely appalled by Cuddle Party. Mm-hmm. And like, well, you cuddle? Like you don't spank each other or tie each other up? Like, no, like it's cuddling. Mm-hmm. And you're like, my God, how edgy. So I do think like a healthy spectrum, and choosing the pieces that really nourish you. But as a culture, we just think it has to be one way or the other.
Well, that's what I think was so special about this apartment and the parties you threw in it, is that the spectrum around group sex is very heavily weighted towards the dark room and leather. Less so more these days, but still very much so. You think of sex club, you do not think of a well-lit apartment.
A fungeon.
You don't think of fungeons.
It's a dungeon.
And I think that there are places that certainly do have the broad daylight and the cozy and the cuddly, but those are far fewer than the basements and Hell's Kitchen with the crosses in every room. Yeah.
Or we also think of like the swingers club on the beach at like a resort, and it's all exhibitionist sex, right?
Swingers, yeah. Which again, that's another flavor. But I think the fact that you were able to add to the sunlight drenched dimension of it, and the imperfect bodies, and the queer spectrum, and the gender spectrum, and the non-monogamy spectrum, and the friendliness of it, right? Again, like so often I'll go to a sex party and I'll go with a lover because I don't know if I'm going to have anybody else to hang out with because it's hard to meet people. So there at your parties, because we're all looking at each other, we're all talking, we're all having orange juice while we're discussing our STD status, we're able to get to know people in a different way. Like the people that I met at your sex parties, I still have a lot of fondness. Even if we're not friends, like I feel like I know them.
Yeah.
In a way that certainly do not know the people that I've been to sex parties in the, Brooklyn basements with. And I will always love you and for that, because that is something that you need in your life. And I appreciate that because I didn't know how badly I needed it until I met you.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
Anything else you want to add?
No. I mean, for those of you who never get to be, a part of this apartment, I'm sorry. It's don't show up and buzz for whoever lives here next. They won't understand. And I want to say thank you to so many people. I want to say thank you to my Aunt Lynn, rest in peace. She was the one who told me to take this apartment, and she had no idea what you would do with it. Well, she eventually figured it out, but she just kept it hush hush. But she was the one who told me to take it, and I wouldn't have had the courage to, in 1994, think I could afford $700 a month.
Yeah.
And I thought I would only be here for like 3 years, right? And now it's 24 years later, we're letting go of it, and all of the love and orgasms and the stories of Cuddle Party, the Hasidic rabbi who showed up, who told us we couldn't tell anybody he was here because he would be excommunicated from his community. But his wife had died a decade before, and he hadn't been touched. No. He sat here and he cuddled with a gay man who had been fucked over by his church upbringing, and there was all this healing,
yeah.
And then the brunch play parties, so much stuff happened here. And then there's Manhattan. The island living without any of that pesky sand. And yeah.
I'm really proud of you, baby.
Thanks.
Thank you for sharing this place with me.
You're welcome. And I just want to say thank you to everybody who ever stepped foot in this apartment, and thank you for contributing. I hope there was more pleasure than pain here for you. Can we stop now?
Yeah.
And that's it for this week's episode of Artgasm, as well as Season 1 of Artgasm. I want to thank all of you for listening and participating in this conversation over the past year. I'm so delighted to be able to take a little bit of break and then come back with new episodes for you. Which is to say, if you have any interesting folks that you would like me to interview who work in the realm of sexuality and art, please let me know. You can email me at artgasmcast@gmail.com. That's the best way of getting in touch with me. I'm going to be traveling a lot this year, so I will be on the East Coast this summer. I'm going to be in New York and in Boston and Portugal. So if you've got people that you would like me to reach out to, let me know who they are. Connect me in some ways. I'd really appreciate that. In the meantime, you can keep paying attention to what I'm doing on Twitter at HeyAllieMoon, on Instagram at Allison_Moon, or on Patreon at patreon.com/Artgasm. Meanwhile, please do take care of yourself and others, and remember that the creative process is part of self-care and acknowledging your own validity and worth in this world. So, to the degree that you can, give yourself permission to please put the pencil to paper or put the cursor on the blank page and just start making cool shit. That process has intrinsic and immeasurable value. Until next time.